How's it going, guys? My name is Graham and welcome to Two Left Thumbs. This is everything you need to know about the Eternals. I'm putting this together because of the upcoming movie. I thought it would be cool to dig into the history and the characters a little bit, their powers, their individual personalities, since it's a whole group. I do want to say right away that I'm not like a comic books expert at all. I'm especially not an Eternals expert. I'm just a guy who really likes these types of movies, really enjoys the MCU, decided to do some research and put together a video for your sake as much as mine. A little while back, right when it was announced that it was in development, I did a video like this on Shang-Chi. I started planning a couple other of these, like Black Knight and Power Pack, a couple of other properties that Marvel is supposedly developing right now. But recent news would suggest that the Eternals is pretty high up on Marvel's slate, maybe as early as 2020, and so I figured I should bump up this video and do it right away. I wanted to follow the formula I did for Shang-Chi, where it's like the history of the character, their powers, how they came into development, their creator, some important storylines, how that might be adapted for the movie. I had like a whole structure that I thought worked really well, and I tried to adapt it to this, and it doesn't work very well when you have a whole group of heroes, so I'm going to loosely try to follow that, kind of. But for your guys' sake, I'm going to put a few timestamps on the video here, wherever it ends up being, and I'm going to try and categorize it in ways that make sense, so that if you have one particular interest, then you can skip ahead and go hear about that. Otherwise, we're just going to get into everything relevant about the Eternals that I could possibly turn up, and hopefully disseminate it into something nice and digestible that will prep you for the upcoming movie. First things first, let's talk about the upcoming movie, which I think was announced to be in development somewhere around a year ago. It went from in development to having screenwriters to having a director in a relatively short amount of time, so I think that kind of shows some of the faith that Marvel and Feige have in this story. I also wonder if it's going to have some larger story relevance moving on beyond the first three phases of the MCU, and that's why they want to do it right away following Endgame. Because right now it's looking like in 2020 we're going to have Black Widow, Doctor Strange 2, and the Eternals. None of that is confirmed. A lot of it could change. Black Widow is the only one that's super solid. That's a weird lineup of movies. Black Widow is obviously not going to have a lot of impact on the MCU. Doctor Strange is probably kind of going to do its own thing. The Eternals is maybe where we're going to see larger world building, setting up of the next phase, maybe leading into like the next big bad, or minor, like a sub-boss along the way or something like that. So cousins Matthew and Ryan Firpo were brought in to pen this film. Between them, they have a lot of shorts that have been filmed and developed over the years, but they don't really have any screenwriting credits to point at right now. They have numerous films that they've finished writing, and many of them that are very highly ranked. One of them, I think, even won the 2017 Blacklist, which is like a list of top unproduced film scripts. Very recently, they've had a number of their projects picked up that are now being developed. Those are all like pre- and post-production, so there's nothing to see yet, but they're obviously kind of up-and-comers, and that's where Marvel likes to swoop in and pick them up, maybe looking to groom the next generation of in-house talent that can help guide some of the new directions of the MCU. They've brought on Chinese director, screenwriter, and producer Chloe Zhao to helm this film. She has 2 directorial credits, both pretty small but critically acclaimed films, Songs My Brothers Taught Me and The Rider. I actually haven't seen either, but they're very low budget and have netted her several Best Director nominations. It's really hard to say how Chloe will fit into the MCU style, but they typically seem to make it work. An announcement from a fairly long while ago had said that Cersei and Icarus were going to be the focus of the film. Now there's more recent news saying that maybe Hercules will be the lead, if not one of the main leads. I'm going to talk more specifically about those characters down the line, but there's some rumor mills that are starting to kick up more specifics about this movie, which is kind of exciting. The filming for this one is expected to take place in late August, and Marvel has a track record of usually 12 to 16 months or something like that for filming to post-production to release, and so there's a good chance we'll see it late in 2020 or early in 2021. So here I want to talk very broadly about what the Eternals are, because it's not necessarily a specific group, it's a much broader categorization than that. The same way that Thor and Odin and all of that is kind of analogous for Norse mythology within the MCU, the Eternals are stand-ins for Greek mythology. They reside in the hidden city of Olympia, which is obviously Mount Olympus, and they're immortal, godlike beings with names like Icarus. Now, before we really get into the Eternals, we need to take a step back and look at what led to the Eternals, and that would be the Celestials. Some of the oldest entities in the Marvel Universe, sometimes kind of referred to as space gods. They're ancient beings with immense power. We've actually had a few run-ins with the Celestials in the MCU already, very specifically through the Guardians of the Galaxy films, since they are space-faring entities. The giant severed head that we're referring to as Nowhere is actually the head of an old Celestial. Yeah, these things are pretty big. And there, the Collector is one who's actually known as an Elder. He's one of the few beings in the universe who still really knows about the Celestials. And when he's talking about the orb, the purple power stone there, he shows the Guardians a hologram explaining some of it, and it actually shows Esson the Searcher, who is one of the Celestials. There's a lot of them. They come up here and there. They're very large. They're very powerful. Don't speak a whole lot. So the fact that it's Esson there specifically doesn't seem to matter much. Now, in Guardians 2, Quill's dad, Ego, the living planet, actually claims to be a Celestial.
You own a planet and can destroy 24 spaceships without a suit. What are you exactly?
I'm what's called a Celestial, sweetheart.
In the comics, he is an Elder, the same as the Collector and the Grandmaster, so either that was altered for the sake of this movie, or he's kind of overselling his importance and his, ranking here. He's kind of shown to be a bit of a known liar, so it wouldn't be too big of a stretch to think that maybe he's tooting his own horn a little bit there. So why focus so much on the Celestials when I'm here to talk about the Eternals? Let's tie that together here. The Celestials are very powerful beings, and one thing that they really liked to do is dig into different species and muck around with their evolution. They experimented with many different races and eventually created the Eternals. They didn't create the Eternals uniquely to humans, they actually did it with several species across the universe. When the Eternals are created from within a species, they're kind of meant to be set up to be defenders of that place, so the human-based Eternals are meant to defend Earth. Something of interest within the MCU is one of the other successful Eternal creations from the Celestials was with the Kree. Now, when they're meddling around like this, you start off with the humans, and these are the prime humans. When you start experimenting, it kind of spins off and creates the Eternals, but there is often a counterpart to it that is the Deviants. They're these violent foils to the Eternals, often with physical deformations. We've actually technically met Deviants in the MCU as well. The Celestials came in and were messing around with this reptilian race, which eventually became the primary Skrulls, the Eternal Skrulls, and the Deviant Skrulls. Now, most of these experiments took place thousands, more often millions of years ago. The age and breadth of this timeline is kind of interesting for the MCU. We've had this, 10 to 15 year focus with Captain Marvel taking place like a decade or two earlier. Now all of a sudden we have immortal characters that are the results of millions of year-old experiments. That's a lot of time in between that they could pencil this movie into. I'm kind of excited for the sandbox potential here. They can just set this movie whenever the hell they want. Now, when they're doing these experiments and they create the adversarial Deviants and Eternals, you're still left with that Prime somewhere in the middle. Pretty non-special, regular old, same as you found them essentially, versions of that species. But the interesting thing that they've tied into all of this is that these experiments, despite leaving you pretty well the same, leave holes in the DNA structure. Now, there's all kinds of crazy spinning out storylines that are too much to get into, but the Kree actually discovered that you can activate these holes within the DNA sequence. This process is what results in Inhumans, something that was explored with the show that nobody watched and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So there's obviously a lot of questions there that this movie can suddenly answer. But much more importantly, given the recent acquisition of Fox by Disney, is that there's the chance for random infills to occur within this DNA structure that results in mutants. These gaps can also be filled in sometimes by specific catalysts like a serum or exposure to radiation or a massive energy signature like an Infinity Stone. Essentially, through this DNA gap thing, they've explained why every character in the MCU has abilities, and it explains that these characters had specific DNA structures that were able to capitalize on these catalysts rather than just being killed by it. So yeah, that's why not everyone becomes the Hulk or Captain Marvel when exposed to explosive, deadly, radiative blasts. The Eternals are super-powered, long-lived, they all have super strength and durability, that same old. They have really low birth rates. They just don't seem to have kids very often, so there's very discrete generations of the Eternals as I understand it. And anytime an Eternal has had a child with a human, it ends up just being a human. They're also pretty dang smart and have some very advanced technologies. Now this is going to take a few steps to get there, but there's one very obvious tie-in of all of this to the current iteration of the MCU. Way back when, in early history of the Eternals, there was the brothers Kronos and Uranos. You can probably see my eyes like glancing at what I have written out here because I can't memorize this. Kronos and Uranos were fighting to determine whether or not they should subjugate the other races and species on the planet. Kronos was in the camp of no, let them be, let's protect them, and he won out, banishing his brother. There's a lot of stuff that spun out with that. I didn't fully grasp it. I think that's around the time he came into contact with the Kree and taught the Kree about making Inhumans. I was burning out on research at that point, so don't put a lot of stock in that. Now, Kronos on Earth eventually has two sons, Zuras and Alars. I can talk about Zuras a little bit later because I think he's more likely to have an actual role within this movie, so I'll cover him along with other specific Eternals. But Alars actually marries Suzanne, which is like Susan, but alienified in a way. And together they have two children, Eros of Titan and Thanos. In the scene in Infinity War where they're on Vormir, Red Skull actually name drops Alars.
Welcome, Thanos, son of Eros.
Never been mentioned before, never again after that. Maybe they're kind of setting up some larger things here, but probably it's just a little bit of like a wink and a nod to people who are familiar with the comics. Thanos is one of the only beings or Eternals known to be afflicted by the Deviant Syndrome. It's basically a disease that even though you're an Eternal and the child of Eternals, you still kind of end up looking like a deviant. So yeah, people were not big fans of the guy right off the bat, kind of scared right away, thought maybe he didn't belong. His mom tried to kill him at birth. Maybe explains some of his issues. He's got his normal, handsome-looking brother Eros going by his cool name Star Fox, and then he's weird, leathery, purple handbag Thanos. So even if they don't get into this very directly, even if they don't have the character of like Alars specifically, there's a chance that through conversation or specific run-ins they could give more context to Titan and Thanos as a whole, which would be pretty cool. Next up, I should probably talk about some specific Eternals, the ones that are likely to appear in this movie. Over the years, there's been a lot of Eternals grouped into these different generations, and I think that has to do with that whole low birth rate thing. This is tough to make a movie on, because your pool to draw from is very large, but you want to keep it small enough that we have time to learn these individual characters over the course of the movie. The Guardians of the Galaxy did that so well. You don't want Suicide Squad where half the characters don't matter. You certainly don't want The Hobbit where 90% of the characters don't matter. But this needs to be a diverse array of unique characters that aren't just going to feel like the Avengers or the Guardians. That's a really tall order, and I'm curious to see what they do with it. Now, there have been some casting lists that have gone out that largely highlight which characters specifically are going to be in this film. That gives us most of what we have to go off of. But there's certain things in there that are like strong male lead or things like that, which at this point is looking more and more likely to be Hercules. For the most part, I'm pulling these from specific namings where they said, yes, specifically this person is going to be in the movie. But, you know, things can change. This movie is a ways away from actually filming or casting or anything like that. Specifically, I do want to highlight two characters, Karen and Piper. These characters are being cast separately. They went out in a separate call from the rest of this ensemble. Seeing as this movie is still something like 4 months away from filming, and these casting sheets have been available for a while, it's unlikely that they would cast two random characters early without the rest of it, unless they had a specific purpose for that. People are speculating that maybe these two characters are going to be lined up for some sort of post-credit stinger in one of the upcoming movies. Given the cosmic nature, it would probably make the most sense to stick it at the end of Endgame, but I don't really want that to happen because I want that movie to just feel final, you know? I want the credits to end and feel like an end, but that's a personal thing. Karen is being listed as a female in her early 30s of any nationality. They ask for a lot, but generally it seems like they want someone who can equally pull off badass and warm and nurturing, international and timeless feel. That's cool. I like the broadness of what they're going at here. That seems like a really specific thing that they're looking for there. Good luck to the casting directors. It's going to be tough enough to find someone who can pull off that specific combination you're looking for, so opening it up a little broader is a good idea. Seemingly what's happening here is that this Karen will be a human character who plays as kind of a stand-in for the audience, maybe the way Jane Foster was in Thor. That's speculative, but that kind of seems like that's what they're going for here. The other one, Piper, will be a 10 to 16-year-old female, so quite young, with a magnetic personality and wise beyond her years. Now, people have begun to speculate that these are either fake names to kind of throw people off the scent, or they're changing it up a little bit for the story, or it will change once the final movie begins. It's hard to know exactly, but people are saying maybe these are stand-ins for Margot, Damien, and Sprite. Margot is an archaeologist who, with her father, discovers the existence of the Eternals. Sprite is essentially Puck from Midsummer's Night Dream, and there's this whole goofy thing that maybe Sprite was Shakespeare's inspiration for Puck. I don't know about that. That seems like some Doctor Who shit. So people have already started to kind of pen in what they think that post-credit scene will be. Like maybe Karen or Margot uncovers the existence or evidence of the Eternals or finds Olympia or something like that, and then Sprite or Piper swoops in and takes her off to space to meet the rest of the Eternals. Sprite in the comics also can take on more of a nefarious role, because at one point they actually made everyone forget that they were superpowered Eternal beings, and they all just started living on Earth like regular humans. So maybe this Karen is going to discover that these people are actually Eternals, and Sprite will try and stop her. I don't know, it's hard to contain something like that into a small little post-credit, but it makes you wonder why they're casting these two separately. I don't know, there's a lot of potential for a cool, ambiguous, intriguing post-credit stinger there that'll get people excited about a new, very unknown property like this. Now, all of the Eternals channel their powers through the same cosmic energy, so because of that, they're all kind of technically capable of the same range of abilities to varying degrees. That makes it much easier than trying to list off like the X-Men and saying what everyone's individual powers are. Every Eternal, to some extent, has that superhuman strength and durability. They have concussive blasts that they can shoot from either their hands or eyes, flight, mind reading and mind control, generating illusions, teleporting vast distances, although they try to not do it very often because it's very taxing on their energy reserves, transmuting objects, altering both shape and composition, and force fields. There's also a very peculiar thing that 3 or more Eternals can do, where they kind of come together into this Gestalt being called a Unimind, where it's this psionic energy ball of a being that is the combination of all of their powers. So those are broadly things that apply to every single character. I'm going to take this a step into the specific characters that we're probably going to be seeing within this movie, and a good segue for that is actually Sersi, one of the ones who's supposedly going to be a focus of this film, and also one of the few Eternals who seems to have had a lengthy staying power throughout the comics beyond the Eternals comics. Sersi is kind of playful, a little bit mischievous, quite flirtatious, actually preferring to live as a human rather than a crime-fighting superhero. She is an example of one of the Eternals who has kind of made this trade-off where they've chosen to focus their energies solely on perfecting one thing rather than being broadly good at all of the applicable powers. So specifically, her powers of transmutation are far stronger than any of the other Eternals. They're looking for a female in that 20 to 40 age range, so kind of a bit broad there. There's been some recent rumor mills that Angelina Jolie is being tapped to play a character in this film, and people are wondering if maybe Sersi is the one. I'm not saying Jolie doesn't still look great, but she's kind of pushing above that, 40-year-old limit there. I would suspect that Angelina's not particularly interested in signing up for what's probably going to be a big series leading character for a decade to come. So my guess is Angelina will be playing a smaller role, like some character's mother or mentor or something like that. Curious to see what they do with that. It would be pretty cool to have a big name like her attached to this movie. Early news about the development of this movie talked about it being about Sersi and Icarus. Right now it's looking like the studio wants, again, a male in that 20 to 40 year range. He's kind of the hot-headed powerhouse of the group. And an interesting piece of story thread there that I've already mentioned, Icarus disguises himself as a simple cameraman named Ike, and he goes on an expedition helping Margot, which may end up being this Karen character, who the hell knows. It's probably assuming too many things right now. He is pretty much adept at every and all of the available Eternal powers. I mentioned earlier in the video that Kronos had 2 sons, Zuras and Alars. We've already talked about Alars, obviously. He's the father of Thanos. He went and kicked off to Titan and did his own thing. Zuras actually stuck around on Earth. He's the real leader of that Earth-based set of Eternals. For the Eternals on Earth, Icarus is essentially only second to Zuras. So because of that, he kind of delegates a lot of his, larger responsibilities to Icarus whenever it's something that's requires the best of the best, the top brass. Icarus is the guy to send in. So the list of bad guys he's taking down is pretty long, and he thinks pretty highly of himself because of that. Probably Zuras is going to be in this movie in some capacity. He's the strongest Eternal on Earth. He actually has a cool claim to fame in that he's the one who invented the ritual of the Unimind. He also has well above beyond average capabilities and all of the potential Eternal powers, so when Kronos eventually dies, he was the one chosen to take up that mantle as the leader on Earth. Now, thanks to recent casting rumors, it's looking very likely that Hercules is going to be in this movie, which is very strange because Hercules is not actually an Eternal. It remains to be seen if it's going to get laced in there in a particular way or if he's going to be retconned to actually be an Eternal. A lot of the news actually also comes along with the thing saying Marvel's hoping this will be the first gay lead superhero in a film. It's unclear when they say lead if they mean the lead or one of the leads. So he isn't an Eternal, but he is an Olympian, so it's possible that maybe he hangs out in Olympia with the Eternals and they're just good buddies with the guy. There is a precedent in the comics where he is exiled from Olympia, and so maybe the Eternals haven't met him and he comes back and they meet for the first time and team up or what have you. It'll be curious to see where they go with that. Basically, this is no different than the Hercules you're thinking of. He's fast and strong and durable and tough. These very recent rumor mills, and I'm talking like the last couple days here that have been saying he's going to be really important to this film, are saying that maybe Luke Evans is in talks to play the role. Towards the end of this video, I'm going to do kind of a casting thing here, so I can talk about that more then. Now, some other characters that were kicked up through those casting mills. Elysius, looking for an actress in that 20 to 40 range. She's kind of a unique role within the Eternals because she's not actually an Eternal made from the Celestials out of the humans. She is an artificially created being with the goal being to mimic the Eternals. I guess it was successful because she has the usual Eternal powers. She uses her telepathy to control these griffin creatures, and she has some sort of badass alien weapon that is useful in many situations. Cool tie-in and fact from her, she was actually created by Isaac, a sentient supercomputer on Titan. Which, I mean, when we see Thanos' rendition of what Titan used to look like, yeah, they had some cool tech going on there. And obviously we know now that they had Eternals living on the planet, so I guess they were modeling her after those. They are looking for a male in the 25 to 45 range to play the Forgotten One, aka Gilgamesh. He is the Forgotten One because eventually Zuras kind of exiles him from the group. He's an outcast because he was overly prideful. During his exile, he focused on training his many abilities, and he's considered one of the strongest hand-to-hand combatants of the Eternals. He's a big, cool, loner fighter dude. I could see him not being a very substantial role, but like being a fan favorite. They asked for another male in that 25 to 45 range to play Makari. He's a member of the Eternals Technologists Guild. So he's one of the smarter ones, takes part in designing a lot of tech, including some cool super vehicles, I guess. He's witty and a loyal speedster. Everyone within the group is fast, but this guy's, he's like Quicksilver fast. Also extra strong and great reflexes, which I think goes along with speedster. Now, while Icarus is kind of Zeras's go-to guy, he does actually have a daughter, Thena. They are looking for an actress in that 20 to 40 range. A formidable combatant, but one who's shown to also have a big heart. Very powerful and obviously has an in with Zeras, so her and Icarus tend to butt heads quite a bit and have a bit of a feud. In addition to the usual Eternal powers, she carries around a bow that can fire arrows of cold energy, which sounded pretty cool, and she has a spear that does all kinds of magic and powerful things. It's a cool set of weapons. It's very interesting to see when you come up with a group of superheroes that all can do the same array of things, how you start distinguishing them. Usually it's just that one person is better at one of those things than someone else, so I like seeing that some of these characters stand out in more unique ways. An incredibly interesting one that I'm really excited to see how it shapes up in the movie here is actually Eros, the brother of Thanos. He also sometimes goes by Star Fox, which maybe there was a time when that was a cool name, but in our modern world of Star Foxes and Star Lords, maybe he'll just go by Eros. He's known to be a carefree womanizer and an adventurer. His brother was the Mad Titan. I mean, he wasn't born with any deformities like his brother, so I think he had kind of a chill, privileged life. He can fly at supersonic speeds, and he has psionic abilities that allow him to calm people around him, which he then often uses to make them more susceptible to his powers of persuasion. Supposedly, he's less resistant to injury than the rest of the Eternals are, but he still shares their intense healing properties. Now, Druig was a casting choice asked for with no qualifiers of age or appearance, just a male actor. Throughout the years, he's acted as a KGB agent. He has more sadistic tendencies than the other Eternals. He seems to more often seek power and rule, whereas they're just there to protect people. Honestly, in a list of characters that appear to be relatively underdeveloped and underutilized, there is very little to read up on this guy, which makes me hope that they really go for like a powerhouse actor or someone who's going to give it a really unique spin to stand out, because right now there's kind of a wide space here that you can do whatever the hell you want with it. Now, another character who is not listed in any of these castings, but people have frequently said is very likely to appear in the film, is Ajak. There's a few threads starting to form here. I said that Zeras likes to delegate to Icarus. One of the things he asks him to go do is to awaken Ajak because the Celestials are coming, and at that point Icarus disguises himself as Ike to go and help Margot and her dad, and through that they awaken Ajak and they discover that Eternals are a thing. So that whole connection of characters and storyline and stuff might exist within this movie somewhere. So that's one reason I think he might appear in the film. His powers are pretty standard, but I would like the inclusion of him because he seems like a bit of a wild card. He's seemingly helped the Eternals just as many times as he's turned on them. He's backstabbed them all the time. He's mind-controlled Gilgamesh before, and he's like killed some of them, and he's kind of wishy-washy, so I think it would be intriguing to have a character like that in the movie. The development of Shang-Chi was very interesting and kind of spoke a lot about the times of which it was made. That's not so much the case here. It's a set of characters that were developed in the 70s by Jack Kirby. He had actually left Marvel to go work at DC, where he created the New Gods. It was a short saga he had planned with a definitive ending. It wasn't meant to spin out in some long decade series or anything like that, and yet they still canceled it early. So Kirby actually came back to Marvel, created the Eternals, which largely thematically was the same as the New Gods, but then it was also cancelled early with a bunch of unresolved plot pieces. Further down the line, a separate set of writers actually tied up some of those loose ends in a Thor storyline. So while the Eternals themselves didn't really have a strong impact on the larger Marvel comic universe, they did kind of latch onto the Celestials and adapt them further into the Marvel canon. Both Titanians, which I think is what you would call Titans, and Uranians from Uranus, created by Jim Starlin and Stan Lee respectively, were eventually retconned to be Eternals. So the Eternal comic series didn't have much success, but through the Celestials and some retconning, they were still having an impact on the larger universe. There's been kind of flitting attempts to revive the Eternals several times, none of which have really gone anywhere or been very successful, but there's a few characters like Cersei who have endured. She pops up all over the place. I'm pretty sure she was even an Avenger at one point. So it's a pretty interesting property for Marvel to reach into. Maybe they like it because there's a lot to explore there. There's not a lot of expectations going in terms of story or development or characters. Maybe that's what Marvel needs right now, is just the ability to do whatever the hell they want after 10 years of this crazy, large Thanos through line. Between characters like Karen, Piper, Xerath, Cersei, Icarus, Hercules, Elysius, Gilgamesh, Makari, Star Fox, Thena, and Druig, they're kind of swinging for the fences here. This is a pretty huge lineup if all these characters are meant to be introduced in a full capacity. The Eternals as a group is a weird kind of amorphic thing where it never lasted long enough to have major things like House of M or Dark Phoenix that you can point at that involve the entire team. And then the characters that do spin out kind of just hang out in all these weird, specific, isolated little events that it's too hard to say that any of those were specifically super impactful. If you look at the Wikipedia page for a character like Cersei, every Marvel character you've ever heard of pops up there at least once. I mean, these characters are potentially spanning millions of years. They tend to have a lot of run-ins with other characters. One thing I really liked about the Shang-Chi video was that I had the ability to pinpoint what I thought were some of the coolest storylines across his entire run and say, like, these might be worth adapting. I don't really have that here. As I mentioned before, at one point the Eternals actually have their memory wiped by Sprite, another Eternal. They go on living their lives like normal humans, but then there's some traumatic event that reactivates their memories and their abilities. Some of them get the memories and abilities back faster than others, and some kind of relearn how to use the abilities faster than others. If the movie is set 5,000 years in the past or a million years in the past or whatever, then I don't care about anything like that. But if they, in this movie or some future movie, want like a modern tie-in, I assume they'll have the event of they have lost their memories. Cersei, you live in New York. Why weren't you helping for any of that? I didn't know I had the ability. With Cersei being kind of a major character beyond the Eternals throughout Marvel Comics here, she has more interesting stuff to pull from than anyone else. There's one storyline where she starts to have like a mental breakdown that they call the Mad Weary. Everyone is kind of chalking it up as being a product of their excessively long lives. Yeah, you've been alive too long. You've seen too much shit. You're kind of getting driven mad a little bit. Wouldn't be the first time that an Eternal has gone kind of mad. Having a story centered on a character with like a mental instability, the closest I can think of is like Hancock, and he was just an ass. Or maybe Xavier's story arc in Logan, it could be something kind of like that. If this is the route they choose to go, like a main character suffering from a mental illness, it might more explain why Marvel chose to go with an intimate director like Chloe Zhao. Someone who could maybe take a little bit more low-key approach to a big blockbuster superhero movie and ask some really tough questions. Now in the comics we eventually learn that, of course, there's some outer source that's resulting in all this, but there's plenty of room for that to be handled differently in these movies, with her friends and allies simultaneously fearing for her while being distrusting of what her motives are and her dangerous nature being a powerful being. Maybe that's the sort of interplay that happens once you've already met characters, like in a sequel, but I think that's a cool storyline. Probably it's just going to pit the Eternals against Druig. Maybe Ajax will be in there somewhere. Probably they'll chuck in a couple deviants or something like that. There's no really cool go-to Eternal storylines that need to be adapted, you know? So in terms of an actual movie plot, I have no idea where they would choose to focus this movie. What I think I would most like to see is something that's way outside in the past, like thousands of years ago. Long enough ago that recent MCU events and Thanos and what have you is like not important right now. They can drop little nuggets of information about Titan and maybe rumors of the Mad Titan who's currently causing trouble there. Maybe they set up some stuff for mutants. but like small little kernels of ideas. I don't need a movie dedicating too much of its screen time to over-explaining a bunch of things. Seeing as these characters can easily be thousands of years old, I think it would be really cool to tell this isolated story that directly affects these characters in the context of the time that they're in, without worrying about how that ties into the year 2010. Maybe we don't even need to carry the entire team across many movies. If we're going to have something like these 10 characters all stacked up, maybe existing on two sides of a conflict or something like that, it would be kind of cool if some of them die, or decide to not be heroes anymore, or leave and go and do something else. Maybe they never make the Eternals 2. It would be like Rocket and Groot hanging out in a Thor movie, or Thor hanging out in a Guardians movie, or Star-Lord hanging out in the next Captain Marvel movie. Not everything needs to be a trilogy, not everything needs this big whole huge overarching thing across them. Introduce these characters, establish a few of them. The comics for the Eternals never held up very well in a serialized format, but individual members of them spun out all across the universe. Have a movie where Cersei and Icarus show up together, and a completely different one where Hercules comes and helps out. I mean, it's really amazing when Doctor Strange shows up in Thor Ragnarok, but I know that these characters and actors are dedicated to their own films and their own storylines and stuff, so there's limitations to how often you can use them and where and still have it make sense. What if you just had a cool roster of well-liked characters who can pop up wherever the hell you need them at any time? That's my perfect vision of how this ends up playing out, I think. If they choose to do a trilogy, maybe it would be cool for all three of the movies to be set thousands of years ago and still have the characters pop up here and there in modern times. I think they need to stop worrying about tying together every individual movie to such a, inseparable extent. Spawn a couple major characters, maybe a major villain from this film, and maybe utilize them somewhere in the future, but I think it would be a breath of fresh air to not feel so tied up in the larger MCU web. In the past, I've done fan casting videos for, the Fantastic Four, X-Men, and a larger set of Spider-Man movies within the MCU. So I thought about doing this as its own video, but this is an everything about the Eternals video, so I think a fan casting fits within there as well. I came up with one or two of these myself, but largely I look through other people's lists and pick out the ones that I like the most. And the biggest stipulation I always put on these when I talk about fan castings is that Marvel really famously will reach for up-and-coming talent, whereas when people are fan casting, they're going to pick from names that they already know. For every Chris Hemsworth being propelled to A-lister status with Thor, we also have a Benedict Cumberbatch who was really popular at the time, so he gets cast as Doctor Strange. So do I expect to be actually right about any of these? No, not really, but it's still fun. We'll work through that cast that we've established already, starting with Karen. It was suggested Cynthia Erivo. It's one of the first suggestions I saw, and I was pretty sold on that one. They said they wanted someone who could pull off badass and nurturing, someone with that international timeless appeal. After her work on Widows and Bad Times at the El Royale, I feel like Cynthia is a strong up-and-comer. I think that would be a pretty good pick. Another good one I saw was maybe Jodie Whittaker. She just has a cool attitude, and there's something about her that really feels like it could pull off archaeologist if that's what this character ends up being. Is there some weird movie trope for female archaeologists that I'm falling for here that I don't even realize? I have no idea. Piper is currently looking for a strong young female lead who's very charismatic and wise beyond their years. So whenever young female roles come up these days, everyone always says Millie Bobby Brown. This might be one of the first times I think that might actually be a good fit rather than just a go-to casting. Especially if this character does end up having some of those Puck-like trickster qualities, it would be fun to see Millie kind of cut loose with a really weird, wacky role. I'm pretty sure Sprite in the comics is a boy, so if they decide to go back to that and use a male casting again for a young kid, I would say Jacob Tremblay is a very strong young actor, or Aidan Gallagher. I only saw some of The Umbrella Academy, and I don't really know how I feel about that show, but he stood out immediately. My suspension of disbelief that this guy was like a 50-year-old man living in a 15-year-old's body, I was like, how did you manage to cast that? I didn't realize that was a real thing that existed in the world. That's amazing that you managed to cast a man in a boy's body. Maybe that's a sucky typecasting to receive, but that's his fault for being so convincing. Now, Hercules, they did say that they were looking at Luke Evans. I think part of being an actor is that straight men can play gay men and gay men can play straight men. But I think if you're going to boast that this is the first gay male lead in a superhero movie, then you should probably find an openly gay actor to play them. I don't think that always has to be the case for any future gay heroes that come up, but I think for this one, if they're going to try and sell headlines like that, it would help. And also, the role is Hercules, so it has to be someone who can beef up substantially. So there's a lot of actors who I just don't think have the frame to properly carry that. I don't think we're ever going to get someone who looks like The Rock or maybe even Chris Hemsworth. But we could get someone who's convincingly large and young enough, I think. Possibly Luke McFarlane, Charlie David, Andrew Hayden Smith. It really depends what they're looking for in this character. Basically, all they've said is openly gay male lead or something broad like that. They weren't asking for specific enough qualities to know which of these actors could really carry that, but it would be interesting to look at. Another fun one could actually be Scott Evans, Chris Evans' brother. They look related, but not related enough that I think it would be jarring to people, like, why is Hercules related to Steve Rogers? Just kind of interesting that is an option that's on the table. Now, Cersei is the one that people are thinking is most likely that Angelina Jolie is being tapped for. That would be pretty cool. I don't really see her signing on for a big, huge franchise MCU thing. Maybe if they told her she could direct the film, because that seems to be her thing lately, but yeah, I'm not sure about that one. Here's another one where everyone basically everywhere was saying Sophia Boutella, or is it Boutella? Am I supposed to say it like Nutella? I think it's another one like Millie Bobby Brown, where people throw her name around in fan castings all the time. Same with, what's his name, Jansen Ackles. They're just people who get fan cast and everything, but they never actually get these parts. But this is one time where I think that might actually be a good fit. She obviously has like a strong fan base. It would be pretty cool to tie her into a large superhero franchise. There's also Liu Yifei, who's going to be playing Mulan in the upcoming live-action remake. Obviously someone who's about to have a very strong career ahead of them, someone who Disney seemingly has a lot of faith in. Maybe they would look to her again. Now, Icarus is one where I don't think I liked a lot of the fan castings that people were coming up with. If we want a really handsome looking young dude with like blonde hair who can play hot-headed, arrogant really well, I would like to see Billy Magnussen. Dude's been having a solid stretch lately. I've seen him pop up in absolutely everything. He's also got these sweet comedy chops. Like, I think he would be cool to throw in a mix in like in an ensemble team movie like this. The one fan casting I did come across that I thought was okay was Garrett Hedlund. I could get behind that, but for the most part it seemed like people were fan casting actors who are probably too old to play this character anymore. So those are the two I think it comes down to in my mind. The number one casting for Xeras has been Javier Bardem. I don't know enough about Xeras to go beyond that. Javier is super dope. I think that would be a cool casting. Another cool one that came up was Viggo Mortensen, and I love me some Viggo. I think there's got to be a place for him to play some badass villain or something. The dude's such a great character actor. There's got to be a good place to utilize Viggo. One particular reason I actually really do hone in and like Javier Bardem is because of the strong casting choices for Thena. And the best fan casting for that was Stephanie Beatriz. Isa Gonzalez came up quite a bit. You're going to have this Latina actress, and I think it makes sense to have Javier Bardem play her father. But Stephanie would still be my go-to for this role. For Elysius, the robotic Eternal, the artificial one, Sonoya Mizuno, I recently saw her in Maniac and really liked what she had done there. She wasn't like a robot, but she was a very, like, removed, calculating scientist. I don't want actors to just play the same types of roles over and over again, and I think this would be quite a bit different. But it showed a cool side of her acting range that I think would apply well to this character. But another one I'm going to suggest that I pulled up is Tasha Fuller. Honestly, an actress I'm not particularly familiar with, but she did play a role in Songs My Brothers Taught Me, which Chloe has directed. And you know, directors like to work with talent that they already know, so I wouldn't be surprised if Chloe reaches back to one of her movies and pulls someone up into this movie. The Forgotten One, Gilgamesh, supposed to be this big fighting badass. Everyone keeps suggesting Florian Munteanu. I'm looking directly at the spelling of that name, and I still don't think I got anywhere near right. The bad guy boxer in Creed 2. I honestly think that would be a super sweet choice. Depending the direction they want to go, John Cena, that's stupid. I hate myself for even suggesting it. Delete this video. I don't think I honestly believe that. Vin Diesel, though, maybe? I think ever since they gave him the role of Groot, they've been looking for an opportunity to give him a physical character in the universe, and so maybe the Forgotten One would be a cool choice. McCary, the speedster, he's probably going to be a very energetic person, but he's also supposed to have that wittiness and the intelligence. I saw Blake Jenner come up, and I thought, maybe. I didn't really see anything for this role that stood out as like, yes, obviously, that's such a good choice. Manny Jacinto came up, and that hyperactive side that he brings to The Good Place could be really funny in a role like this, but I've never seen him play like a hyper-intelligent character. Honestly, maybe I would like to see that here, because maybe it would give us a good sense of his breadth as an actor and maybe not be so typecast. Ajax, I have no idea. I don't know enough about this character. This is a wild card. Throw Charlie Day in there.
Guys, why aren't the brakes working?
Because I cut the brakes! Wild card, bitches! Yeah! What?
This is going to be a heavy one. Eros, Star Fox, he's the brother of Thanos. Obviously, they're not going to look alike, they're not going to act alike, they have very little in common. But if through some series of events in these films they put these two actors on screen together, they've got to stand up against Josh Brolin as Thanos, which is like masterclass powerhouse acting, like scene commanding acting, so you need someone who's pretty heavy-hitting to play this role. One of my favorite actors right now is Patrick Wilson. He's got that charm and like that sass potential that I think could be kind of interesting to see against serious-minded Thanos. The way that your brother, more than anyone else, can know how to push your buttons, I could see Patrick Wilson getting in there with Josh Brolin and just pushing buttons. Matt Bomer is another cool actor who just, like, needs a big break. I like him as an actor, and I'm surprised he hasn't been tapped for one of these movies yet, as DC, Marvel, anything like that. It would be interesting to have Josh Brolin go up against someone who's lesser known like that, but I think he's someone who could add something really cool to that role. And finally, Druig, whose name is hard to say, who is probably going to end up being the main villain of this movie. Some people have suggested Keanu Reeves, and I think that's pretty funny because he was almost a part of like one or two Marvel movies at some point or another already, and it just hasn't happened. It sounds like he's still maybe interested in taking part. The right role just hasn't come along. If they're like casting blind for this, they just want a male and they don't really care what, throwing Keanu in there might be pretty cool. Let him do whatever the hell he wants with the role. It could be a really interesting result. But if you want a more serious, more intense, like villain-style villain, then Jackie Earle Haley is always cool. The dude's intense and ferocious and always brings some just intensity to his roles. So he's always going to make a good villain. Guys, I can't believe this is the case, but I've been recording this for an hour and 40 minutes. I've essentially been talking about this for the length of an entire movie. I'm going to whittle it way down. I'm probably going to speed it up by like 20% so it's a little bit less to sit through. But I hope you feel more familiar with the Eternals, the Celestials, what they have planned for this movie, what we know so far, the characters, how it might all start to fit together. It's fun for me to put these sorts of videos together, but there's a reason I don't do it particularly often. Thank you guys so much for watching it. In these end cards here, I'll have a link to the one of these I did on Shang-Chi, which is probably significantly shorter depending how this comes together, and a link to some of my fan castings I've done. Like, now that Fox has actually been acquired by Disney, those what-if style fan castings, what if Fantastic Four and X-Men are in the MCU, what could the castings be? Those could be a reality now, so it might be cool to revisit those. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.